Subscribe and stay with me until the end, because the way an old cabin turned my daughter's greed into my quiet triumph is a twist you won't want to miss. Comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far stories travel. My name is Eleanor, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 72 years old, the kind of woman people peg as gentle pearls at the throat, good linens folded by scent and season, the keeper of everyone's birthdays. For 47 years, my husband Richard and I built a life under the chandeliered ceilings of our Maple Street home, white columns, a grand piano I never quite learned to play, and a garden that smelled of peonies and early promises. When he died, I thought grief would be my biggest battle. I was wrong. The day of the will reading, I sat in a leather chair that sighed each time I moved, hands clasped to stop them shaking. Across from me, my daughter Sloane wore a black suit that cost more than my first car and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. The lawyer, Mr. Prey. Carver read in that measured tone all lawyers use, as if you might break if the words come too fast. To my wife, Eleanor, I leave the cabin on Pine Creek Road, along with all its contents. I blinked. The cabin? The place with a roof like moth-eaten felt and windows that cried in the wind? To my daughter Sloane, I leave the residence on Maple Street, the bank accounts, investments, and a sum of $6 million. $6 million. My breath snagged. I waited for some addendum, a trust for me, a note, an explanation. There was nothing. Sloane squeezed my wrist with fingers too cold for living flesh. "No mistakes, Mom," she murmured, falsely tender. Dad knew what he was doing. I had raised that mouth, kissed those cheeks, stitched those Halloween costumes by hand, but her eyes were a smooth, sealed thing. She was already counting money I would never see. On Maple Street that night, I still cooked out of habit. Old motions comfort the dying. Sloane took the wine glass from my hand and set it down with an expensive click. "We need to talk living arrangements." When I said the cabin had no electricity, no running water, a roof that sagged like an old back, she shrugged. "Then you'll just have to fix it. You always said you wanted projects. You have 1 week to pack." I packed my life by the clock, china into boxes. Sloane refused to let me take. It came with the house, Mother, 2 suitcases of clothes, and a stack of photos she sorted through like a customs agent. Every time I reached for something that smelled like a memory, she placed a manicured hand on it and shook her head. No. On the driveway, sun striking the marble steps, she hugged herself and watched me load the trunk of my aging sedan. "It's not personal," she said, but enjoyed making it so. I drove away while she stood centered in the portico like a statue of blind justice who had lost her blindfold. Pine Creek Road was a ribbon of dirt and shadows. The cabin hunched from the trees, clapboard peeling, porch steps soft with rot. Inside, the air tasted like forgotten apples and dust. I made a bed from old blankets, lay on a floor that sloped toward resignation, and watched the night come in through a hole in the roof. I cried for my husband and for the version of my daughter who once reached for my hand in parking lots. Grief is loud at first. Then it thins and leaves a hum like a refrigerator you can't turn off. Mourning demanded a life, water at the old well, kindling for a stove that coughed up soot like an offended cat. Blisters bloomed, then calloused. The phone rang now and then. The sister who said maybe I was acting out. The cousin who wondered if I'd been drinking since the funeral. The neighbor who heard. I'd tried to attack the lawyer. Sloane had seeded a story and everyone tended it like a rosebush. On the 7th day, she arrived in a bright red coupe that announced itself like a brass band. She stepped onto my porch, heels stuttering against wood that might give way, and peered in as if my life were at a museum. "Just checking on you," she said. "This place is quaint." Her gaze crawled across the torn screen, the bucket, the candles. "Perception is reality, Mom," she added, tone light, eyes sharp. "Do try to be stable." She left perfume and contempt drifting behind her. I worked. When you're 72, every task is a negotiation with your body. I bargained hard. I patched the roof with a tarp. I boiled water and called it tea. I learned the creaks, what meant the wind, what meant the house remembering me. On a morning that smelled like pine sap and damp earth, my broom snagged on a nail, which tugged up a loose board in the porch. Beneath it, something flashed, a key, heavy and old, engraved in a pattern of tiny symbols like vines frozen mid-climb. I'm not the kind of woman to ignore a mystery. I carried that key like a talisman, cleaned it with a toothbrush and patience, held it to candlelight at night. 4 days later, flashlight in hand, I searched the basement, a cave of cobwebs, stone walls sweating with time. In the far corner, a sheet metal door lay half hidden behind a shelving unit. The lock wore the same symbols as my key. The click when it turned sounded like a past unlocking itself. Inside, a manila envelope thick with legal documents and a small metal box. I brought them upstairs, drew the curtains back to a square of good daylight, and sorted paper with the care of a surgeon. Mineral rights. Maps. Seals. A geological survey from 2 years before Richard died. Offers. One for $5 million from a mining company, rejected in his hand with a line in the margin, "I'll wait for the right time." I opened the metal box. On top lay a letter addressed to me in Richard's neat hand. "My dearest Ellie," it began, and the rest was a mix of apology and faith. He feared who Sloan had become: greedy, performatively compassionate, strong on paper and weak in character. He believed I would survive what he'd arranged, that I would find what the cabin held, and that no one could pry it from me as they would have pried cash. "The mineral rights are yours, separate and incontestable," he wrote. "They are your freedom." At the bottom, a safety deposit box number. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried, not like a lost woman, but like someone whose map had been returned. At the bank in town, Box 247 cradled more, updated surveys and correspondence from multiple companies. The latest offer was $7 million, a week before he died. I took it all to a lawyer in the next town, Mr. Peterson, an old-school gentleman with ethics older than his desk. He adjusted his glasses, impressed and careful. "These rights are separate and clear, Mrs. Peachers." "Hale," he said, "your husband was meticulous. He advised an independent geological assessment. Don't sell a treasure like you're yard sailing a silver set." While a geologist named Dr. Reeves tromped my land for 3 days with delighted mutters and clever tools, I listened to town talk like an investigator. Sloan, it turned out, was busy. 3 new cars. A wardrobe to shame a movie star. A 2-month European itinerary that was all 5-star hotels and pictures in her head. At the bank, I heard her asking about loans against her inheritance. That kind of hubris has an echo. People hear it everywhere. I kept my face neat and my ears open. Dr. Reeves came back glowing. "Your quartz is excellent, but the amethyst is the story, and there are strong indicators of green tourmaline." He gave me a range, 10 to 15 million for extraction rights, conservatively. Conservatively. I stirred my soup that night the way a conductor lifts a baton before the overture. The cabin stove popped. The key sat in a dish by the window, catching candlelight like an approving wink. I didn't rush. I'm not 20, I do nothing in a rush but remember. Mr. Peterson negotiated. I repaired only what I needed to, had electricity and water installed quietly, no trucks with logos, no fuss. From the road, the cabin remained a picture of poetic hardship. Inside, I added a feather-soft throw, a kettle that sang, a lamp that made the books glow. The outside world believed I was still the woman who'd been tossed out like old newspapers. Let them. A performance is most effective when the audience thinks they're the playwright. 6 months after the funeral, I sold the extraction rights for $12 million and future royalties. My accounts moved like well-drilled soldiers into a fortress of diversified safety. I slept well. I woke hungry for simple food and the day's uses. And then the phone rang, late and tremulous, the voice I used to live for now stripped of its shine. "Mom," Sloan whispered. "Can I come over? Please, it's urgent." I made tea, 2 cups, one for a woman who had humiliated me, and one for the girl who once fell asleep against my shoulder while I folded laundry. The car that crunched up my drive was not the red coupe. It was an older sedan that coughed to a stop. Sloane stepped out wearing expensive clothes that suddenly looked like an unfunny costume. Her hands shook. She stared at the porch like it might judge her. Inside, she sat and gripped the cup as if warmth could be absorbed by force. "I've made terrible mistakes," she said. I waited. "I've learned the usefulness of silence. I owe $400,000. If I don't get help, I'll lose the house, the practice, everything." It was almost comical that she said "the house" as if it weren't the one she took from me. Almost. I said the things that ought to be said, that she'd told me to go live with the pigs, that she'd paraded my supposed instability to the family, that she cut me from my home like a coupon. She wept, and some of the tears may have been real. I listened past the tears for the click of realization, the hinge turning from vanity to humility. "Why should I care about the practice that was so important you shelved being a daughter?" I asked evenly. She stared at her lap like a child who finally bothered to look for the floor. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered. "But you're the only person who ever loved me without needing a reason." Richard's letter had praised my strength. He had also trusted my mercy. I felt both in my bones like weather. "I'll make you an offer," I said, and watched hope flare too fast in her eyes. "I'll lend you $500,000 at 5% interest, 10 years to pay it back." She nodded too eagerly. "But there are conditions." Her jaw braced. "For 5 years, you'll come here every Saturday to help with anything I need. Maintenance, cleaning, the garden. You will speak to me with respect. And you will write a sincere, detailed apology and read it aloud to the entire family at Christmas." She flinched. "That's humiliating." "So is being thrown out of your home by your child," I said, voice tempered to a polish. "Humiliation without growth is cruelty. Humiliation with reflection is discipline." She pressed her lips together and nodded. "I'll do it." The money moved. The relief on her face when she paid her most urgent debts was the kind of relief a person feels after running from a fire and realizing their hair isn't burning. The first Saturday, Sloane showed up in jeans and an old t-shirt that looked new on her, as if humility had a dress code. We hauled boxes from the shed. She blistered. She didn't complain. At noon, I handed her a sandwich and a glass of lemonade, and for the first time in years she said, "Thank you, Mom," like it was a phrase she'd been searching for, and finally found in the pocket of a coat she hadn't worn since high school. "How did you have that much to lend?" she asked between bites, attempting casual and missing. "There are things you never asked about me," I said, "and things your father knew that you didn't care to learn." She didn't press. Pride needs collapse before it can abide curiosity. For months we kept our bargain. She came, rain or blistering sun, raked leaves, scrubbed windows, stacked firewood. We talked. At first, conversation came in nervous sips. The weather, a case at her firm, a memory that floated up like a firefly and surprised us both. Then it turned into something like truth. She admitted to signing for loans because the bank manager flattered her. She admitted the thrill of buying a coat she'd seen on a star, the way owning it made her feel like her life had a soundtrack. She admitted waking at 3 a.m., breath caught, staring at the ceiling fan as if it could unspool her mistakes. Meanwhile, my lawyer structured my money into a fortress that could not be stormed by lawsuits or whispers. I fixed what needed fixing in the cabin and left its deceptions intact. From the road, I was still the old woman boiling water for tea. In my accounts, I was more than fine. It was a delicious kind of invisibility. Town rumor shifted like wind. The same mouths that carried slander now carried news of Sloane's diet of debt and regret. She sold 2 of her 3 cars. The Europe trip got quietly canceled. She bought generic shampoo and didn't tell her friends. At the pharmacy, I saw her asking if her insurance would cover anxiety medication. I wanted to be angry. Instead, I was tired. Anger is a luxury of the young. The old prefer use. Autumn sloped into winter. I found myself looking forward to Saturdays in a way that made me wary and soft at once. Sloane worked. Sloane listened. Once, as she eyed the old photo of Richard in his tux at a charity gala, the two of us under chandeliers, me wearing the same pearls I wore now, she asked, "Did Dad ever warn you about me?" I thought of the letter. "Your father was a wary optimist," I said. "He believed in your potential more than your patterns." Christmas came like a quiet drum. The family gathered at my sister Diane's, the house perfumed with cinnamon and apology waiting in the air. Sloane stood up, unfolded the paper she'd written, and read, her voice steady, then frayed, then quiet. She confessed to the lies she'd spread about my supposed instability, the cruelty of throwing me out, the contempt she had disguised as competence. She said she had been a coward and a snob. She asked forgiveness, not demanded it. Asked. Silence followed, the good kind, the kind in which the air rearranges its molecules to make room for a new shape. People cried. I didn't. I watched, dry-eyed, and felt the strange warmth that comes when a wound scabs in front of you. After, relatives drifted to me with the same sentences in different clothes. "We should have known better. I'm so sorry I believed. You never deserved that." People believe the story that matches their furniture. I didn't waste breath redecorating their minds. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Accountability is a rare and expensive gift. It costs pride and returns decency. In spring, a year after the key found me, I moved into a house I chose for myself on a hill with a postcard view of the valley. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was elegant sunlight across wide oak floors, a kitchen that made you want to bake for people you love, a terrace for sunsets and honest wine. I left a note at the cabin with the new address. When Sloane arrived for her Saturday shift and found the place empty but for my handwriting, her face when she walked into my new house was a picture of stunned arithmetic. "How?" she managed finally, standing in a kitchen that smelled of lemon and something baked with butter. I poured tea into cups with thin rims and a tiny gold line that caught the light. "Your father left me something far better than the house," I said. "He left me rights to what lay under it all. The land at the cabin was worth more than your 6 million ever could have been." I kept my tone gentle. Triumph that preens is just another kind of vulgarity. She sat down and stared at the steam rising from her cup like it could spell answers. "So you didn't need me. I wanted you," I corrected. "Those aren't the same." That summer, she finished paying off the loan 3 years early. She shifted her law practice toward helping families in crisis, not the performative charity she once preferred, but the tedious, unglamorous work of budgets and boundaries. Sometimes I caught her looking at me with something like respect, unhooked from shame. The two are related but not tethered. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Dad had split everything evenly?" she asked one Saturday as we planted lavender by the path. Bees worked around us, intent and honest. "He knew us," I said. "He knew you'd confuse liquid wealth with power and meager inconvenience with ruin. He knew I'd endure. He hoped you would learn. I kept the cabin, by the way. I spruced it just enough that it stopped apologizing for itself. Sometimes I go there alone with a thermos of real tea and a mystery novel, sit on the mended porch, and listen to the trees tell stories about patience. Wealth is freedom when it's quietly owned, otherwise it's a costume. Still, a part of me wanted a reveal, not a vulgar one, but a precise surgical truth offered at the right moment. I got it on a summer evening when the valley's lights below my terrace looked like a spilled strand of diamonds. The doorbell chimed, and there stood Sloane, face from another time, eyes open, mouth uncertain. "I wanted to say goodnight," she said, then hesitated. "And thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me." I didn't cry. I don't like crying on good furniture. But I reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear like I used to when she was 8, and convinced spelling bees determined one's worth. "You did the work," I said. "I just held the door open." A year and change after the will, I threw a small dinner. 8 people, good glasses, the kind of menu that doesn't try to prove anything, roast chicken with thyme, buttery potatoes, a citrus salad that looked like confetti, a tart with berries that bled on the plate in the prettiest way. The terrace held the golden hour like a favor. I wore silk the color of cream and my old pearls, newly restrung, as if they'd shed their grief right along with me. Our guests included Mr. Peterson and his wife, the geologist and his partner, my neighbor, Mr. First. Henderson, my sister Diane, and Sloan. Conversation flowed. We toasted to good earth, which made Dr. Reeves laugh, and to belated wisdom, which made Sloan roll her eyes at herself. After dessert, I stood and spoke. Not a speech, just a practice of telling the truth plainly. I thanked the people who had applied competence where I needed it. I said the cabin had taught me that discomfort is a brutal teacher and an honest one. I said Richard had loved us both, me with respect and Sloan with hope. I did not gloat. The key to dignity is knowing when you don't need to. After the guests left, Sloan lingered. We stepped onto the terrace and watched the town's lights gather themselves into constellations of errand and sleep. She slipped her arm through mine like it belonged there. "Do you hate me for what I did?" she asked finally, the kind of question people ask when they're ready to live with either answer. "Hate is effort," I said. "I saved my effort for mending what could be mended and for letting the rest lie where it fell." She nodded, and we stood there until the night's cool found us. "I want to show you something," I said, and led her to a small chest by my desk. Inside lay the key, its metal a little dulled now from my fingers. I placed it in her palm. "Your father hid life lessons in riddles. He believed you'd learn them when you needed them most." She turned the key under the lamp, watched the symbols catch light. "It's beautiful. It's proof," I said, "that what looks like ruin can be a door." We drove to the cabin the next afternoon. I had left it as it was the day I moved. A poem of survival with some rhyme fixed. Sloan walked the room slowly, trailing fingertips along the beam where I'd scratched dates when I found small victories: electricity, water, heat. "You lived here, like really lived here," she whispered, as if the house might elaborate. "I did," I said. "And I could again, if I had to." The truth of that sat between us like a third presence, warm and stern. On the porch, we drank coffee from thermoses and listened to the woods confess. "I told myself a story about money," Sloan said into the trees, "that it's proof of worth. That if I had enough of it wrapped around me, I'd be someone." "It's a coat," I said. "Wear it, don't worship it. It doesn't change your spine." She laughed, a sound with less acid than before. "You always sounded like this?" "Yes," I said. "You just couldn't hear me over the noise of wanting." In May, a storm snapped a section of old fence at the cabin. On Saturday, Sloan arrived with lumber in the back of her sedan and a set of tools I recognized as newly purchased. She laid out boards on sawhorses with a competence that would have made her father grin. "I watched videos," she said, almost shy. We worked side by side, the way work can repair not just property but narrative. Sweat gave her face a glow money never had. When the last board was in, she stepped back, hands on hips, measuring her own transformation as surely as the fence's line. "It's straight," she said, surprised as a child who's written her name neatly for the first time. "It is," I agreed. Summer spun out. My royalties began to trickle in, the quiet arithmetic of good decisions maturing. I gave some away without announcing it. A scholarship fund at the community college for older women starting over. A grant to the library to extend hours for people who need somewhere safe to sit with their thoughts. I did not put my name on a plaque. I wore the same pearls to the grocery store and charmed the butcher into giving me the nicer cut by accident. One evening, Sloan arrived with a folder and the nervy energy of someone about to jump in a lake. "I want you to see my new intake forms," she said. "I built a program for clients in crisis mandatory financial education, pro bono hours from my firm. Benchmarks for behavior." The old Sloan would have said initiative and optics. This Sloan said behavior and benchmarks, like a person who knows the difference between a promise and a plan. I read the forms, asked questions, gave opinions she wrote down. She didn't always agree, sometimes she pushed back. That's how you know someone's thinking. Respect that is always obedient isn't respect at all, it's fear with lipstick. On the anniversary of our new contract's first day, we drove to Maple Street. The house Sloane had once wielded like a weapon against me had been quietly repainted in a tasteful white, the boxwoods trimmed, the ostentation calmed. She led me into the foyer I used to polish, the dining room where Richard and I had eaten 1,000 small dinners alone after the parties, the music room where I never quite learned that piano but loved its presence like a handsome guest. She had hung new art, landscapes from local painters whose colors understood the weather here. "I want you to feel welcome," she said, and meant it without performing it. I ran my hand along the piano's lid and felt nothing break inside me. That's how I knew the wound had scarred over. Scars are elegant if you let them be. We ate on her back patio under string lights she'd installed herself. "I did the math on voltage," she announced with a pride both ridiculous and darling. Over grilled fish and asparagus, we spoke of inconsequential things that make up consequential lives. Her client who finally told the truth to his wife, my herb garden's temperament, the neighbor's ridiculous new mailbox. Ordinary talk is a luxury you only recognize after famine. On the way back to my hill house, the valley lights did their diamond trick again, and I thought of Richard, his letter, his wary optimism, his belief in me as something built, not borrowed. I do not think the dead orchestrate our lives from beyond, but I think sometimes they leave us a set of instructions written in the language of who they knew us to be. I followed mine. Sloane learned hers. Not long after, my phone buzzed at an hour that used to be for emergencies and is now for soft thank yous. "Good night, Mom," she texted. "I'm proud of you." I laughed out loud. Old woman alone in silk pajamas in a house she bought with her own mind, and replied, "Right back at you." I set the phone down, walked to the terrace, and let the night air rearrange me into the shape of someone finished with surviving and very busy with living. The cabin still keeps the key in its drawer. Sometimes I take it out and hold it just to remember what it felt like to find hope when the world said I'd misplaced it. If you've been sent to some version of that cabin, if a person who owes you tenderness has served you cruelty, listen, your life might be hiding something under the floorboards. The key will look like work, and it will make your hands sore, and it will not glitter like easy money. But it will open a door that, once you walk through, you will never let anyone close again. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity can be rebuilt, and follow for more. Tell me your city below. I love to see